In April 2023, Kathleen Kennedy announced 3 new Star Wars films, and now all 3 seem unlikely to ever make it to our cinemas. And if there's anything consistent during Disney's ownership of Star Wars, it's that if a Star Wars film is announced, it will either be quietly cancelled a few years later, for example Rogue Squadrons and Rian Johnson's trilogy, or if it somehow manages to make it through the landmine that is Star Wars pre-production, it will be adapted to a TV show, or the director will have changed multiple times. For example, Phil Lord and Chris Miller were replaced by Ron Howard for Solo, Gareth Edwards was replaced by Tony Gilroy for Rogue One, and James Mangold's Boba Fett film was adapted into the Disney Plus show The Book of Boba Fett. So with such a poor track record, it's not really a surprise that James Mangold's Dawn of the Jedi, Dave Filoni's Mandoverse film, and Sharmina Obaid-Chinoy's Rey sequel are already being delayed, and are even getting cancelled. So let's take a look at each of these films and see what's already going wrong for these fledgling movies. Firstly, we'll start with the Rey movie, which is set 15 years after the controversial sequel trilogy.
Rey Skywalker.
Now, the announcement of this film at Star Wars Celebration was a rather confusing one, as I truly don't believe that anyone wants a Rey film, except from Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy. I haven't heard any clamour from sequel fans about continuing on the stories of Rey, Finn and Poe. And the fact that it's a standalone film and not a trilogy is also very confusing. And more important than any of these, why on earth would Lucasfilm want to touch the sequel characters after the Rise of Skywalker went down like a pile of poodoo?
Rey Skywalker.
There are millions of fans who hate the sequel trilogy, and millions more who just don't care. So why stir the pot by releasing a film focusing on Rey Skywalker? Sorry, Rey Palpatine. Sorry, Rey Nobody. Well, the reason is Kathleen Kennedy. It's no secret that Kennedy is an outspoken proponent of having women in front and behind the camera, with her famous "The Force is Female" t-shirt and her comments in many interviews, saying things such as, hiring female filmmakers is a priority, and there's nothing we'd like more than to find a female director for Star Wars. So it's no surprise that the Rey movie that's set to be directed by Sharmina Obaid-Chinoy is something that Kennedy really wants to happen. However, after the box office failure of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, Kennedy was prematurely rumoured to have been fired by Disney in August this year. Those rumours were ultimately proved wrong by the fact that, well, she's still at Lucasfilm. But what isn't speculation is that her contract with Lucasfilm ends in 2024, and the release slots of the 3 new Star Wars movies have been delayed to May 2026, December 2026, and December 2027. Which means that with Kennedy leaving Lucasfilm next year, and with the writers' strikes continuing for the foreseeable future, whoever takes over as president of Lucasfilm in 2024 will inherit the Rey film in its very, very early stages of pre-production. And without Kennedy there, who seems to be the only one who wants a Rey film, I really can't see this one being made. It's also worth noting that David Lindelof was the original writer for the Rey movie, but he was fired, and Stephen Knight has been brought in to write a new script. And as far as we're aware, he hasn't started writing a script before the writer's strike. So to summarise, the Rey movie has an inexperienced director in Obaid-Chinoy, no new script until the writer's strike ends, a release slot delay, and next year Kennedy will no longer be at Lucasfilm to fight for the movie. On top of this, it's a completely controversial film from its inception. So considering all of that, in my eyes, the Rey movie has a very low chance of actually being made. Next up, we have James Mangold's Dawn of the Jedi. Now, Mangold's film, which is set 25,000 years before A New Hope, faces many of the same problems that the Rey movie does. Dawn of the Jedi was also announced before any real work had been done. It's been delayed until at least 2026, and the writer's strikes means that we haven't even got a script yet. Furthermore, James Mangold directed Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which, as mentioned earlier, did really poorly at the box office, and received rather negative reviews compared to previous Indiana Jones movies. It's worth saying that the excessive budget that almost guaranteed Dial of Destiny's financial failure, plus the fact that Harrison Ford was an 80-year-old action hero returning to a franchise which already had 2 conclusions, none of this was James Mangold's fault. But nonetheless, the PR damage is already done. I've already heard many people and outlets saying, why should the man who directed a Lucasfilm IP that flopped so badly be given the reins of a Star Wars film? And despite, in my opinion, this being a very oversimplified take, the headlines are there for all to see. On a separate note, James Mangold was due to direct the Boba Fett movie, which was canned after Solo's poor critical and box office performance. So it's not like Dawn of the Jedi would be the first time that a Star Wars film of his has been cancelled. If we look deeper, there are a few similarities with Rian Johnson and James Mangold, in that they both worked on a movie for Lucasfilm, The Last Jedi and Dial of Destiny, and then, before their movies were released, Kennedy announced that Johnson and Mangold would be directing Star Wars films in the future. It most certainly strikes as running before you can walk, as for both directors, after their films were released to the movie-going public, and their movie's reception was less than stellar, their future projects are now tarnished. With Dawn of the Jedi being at least 3 years away, having no script, and Mangold's stock being reduced from Dial of Destiny, I'd give Dawn of the Jedi a 50-50 chance of making it to theatres. And finally, we have Dave Filoni's movie, which ties together the Mandoverse Disney Plus shows set in the New Republic era, after the events of Return of the Jedi and before The Force Awakens. Now this, I imagine, is a film that most Star Wars fans are excited about, for a few reasons. The first one being that Dave Filoni worked with George Lucas for many years, and is seen by many as a successor to Lucas himself, due to his knowledge and passion for Star Wars. He's also been on a rootable journey at Lucasfilm, from animating the Clone Wars with George, then helping Jon Favreau with The Mandalorian, directing his first action series with Ahsoka, and potentially directing his first theatrical live-action movie. However, since the announcement in April, all episodes of The Mandalorian Season 3 have been released, and we're halfway through the Ahsoka series. The third season of The Mandalorian has been panned by many as its worst, and despite having some good aspects, it's hard to argue that it wasn't a step down from the first 2 seasons. And the Ahsoka show has been released to, let's say, conflicting opinions, with many arguing that the dialogue is stiff and wooden and the show is woke, with 5 of the 6 main characters being women. I personally align on the more positive side when it comes to the Ahsoka show. Yes, the dialogue is flawed at times, Hera is very annoying, and it's frustrating that Sabine is yet another character who survives what should be a fatal lightsaber stab. But the visuals are phenomenal, and there's a few great characters such as Baylan and Shin. Nonetheless, Ahsoka's viewership figures aren't good reading. And as Ahsoka is effectively Dave Filoni's trailer for his future film, it's not great that the show is being viewed by only half of the people who watch the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. With Filoni's live-action inexperience and the declining popularity of the Mandalorian-era shows, as well as the less-than-expected viewership for Ahsoka, Filoni's film is absolutely facing a few difficulties. However, I don't believe that these issues are enough to warrant a cancellation of his film, which will most likely be released in 2027. The Mandalorian, and more importantly, Baby Yoda, are possibly more well known than any of the sequel characters, so the appeal of the film featuring the popular pair is too good an opportunity for Disney to turn down. And with the more hardcore Star Wars fanbase having fan favourites such as Ahsoka and Thrawn, the latter of which will play the antagonist of the film, there's a wide appeal for Filoni's movie. So out of the 3 films announced just 5 months ago, I genuinely believe only 1 or at most 2 will actually get past all the drama and complexities of Star Wars film production and make it to their release. Which again just shows how foolish the current leadership and decision making at Lucasfilm is. I don't know any other studio that would announce to the world they're working on 3 standalone films set in 3 completely different eras, and only 5 months later there's questions that any of them will be released. But anyway, now I'd like to know, what do you think? Do you, like me, think that at least one of them will be cancelled, or maybe even all 3? And do any of these films excite you? Let me know in the comments below. If you're new here, then perhaps consider subscribing to Film Club. I'm currently reviewing every episode of the Ahsoka show over the next few weeks, as well as The Creator, a sci-fi movie releasing at the end of the month, directed by Rogue One's initial director, Gareth Edwards. Thank you for watching, and see you again.